Hello, welcome to Observances with Daniel Thompson. I am said gentleman. So I'll answer the question right off the bat. Why add another podcast or another recording of a talking head or just someone going on and on about a subject that we probably talked about ad nauseum? Well, actually, this stems back to something my father told me and something people have been saying for a long time. They've been saying, dude, you got a radio voice. Cool. I never really wanted to do radio. Podcast, though, I guess that's okay. I could manage that. Plus, the point or the purpose of this is kind of to share stories from my 8 going on 9 year career in journalism, both as a journalist and as a person. There are many things that I've experienced that I never put in print. Um, Many things that didn't fall in the realm of newsworthy, but were important as far as personal growth or um, things that had an impact on me in profound ways or things that I never forgot. Um, so I guess the story that I'm going to start off with is the first time that I was told something that I knew I would never forget while on the job. So, I when I was starting out in Kimball, Nebraska, which is where I had my first reporting gig. Um, it was a town of 2,500, way on the western end of Nebraska. It's the last city before you enter Wyoming to the west and Colorado to the south. In fact, I was about 10 miles north of the Colorado state line, but it was all the grasslands that were to the south. It wasn't like you were right there in like a Colorado city. The nearest one, I think Fort Morgan, was about an hour south. Um, Kimball was a small city. And to explain what that means, so when I got there, I was 23. Um, it was, I believe, in October of 2012. And I was in a liquor store because I still drank a lot at that point in my life. And I actually got recognized as the new reporter before I had even been anywhere else. Um, some lady, some woman just looked at me and she was like, "You're the new reporter, aren't you?" And it's like, "Yeah." Meanwhile, just holding like a huge bottle of whiskey. Um, so it was a city where people knew things. Like, if you did something that was in any way messed up or weird or something that people just thought like was of note, everybody in town would know by the end of the day. It was just a weird game of telephone that happened in the city. And that's generally what I experience in small towns anyway. Anyone that I've lived in. So it's not specific to Kimball. And the truth is, the people were really nice to me. Um, though some of them were misguided. And I had some other experiences in the city that I'll probably talk about later. But at the point um, that this thing happened, that I was told this story, I had been in Kimball. I want to say about 6 months to a year because I had been a reporter for about a year. Um, and then I became the editor and publisher um, about a year in. So it must have been a year in because I was a newly minted editor and publisher. And what had happened is that I had my first notable suicide in the city, a businessman. So I heard something come over the scanner, a gunshot, and then there was a lot of noise as far as sirens and stuff. So in a small town, when something makes that big of a ruckus, I guess, you have to kind of report on it. But it was my stubbornness and my youthful arrogance that turned out to bite me in the ass on this one. Because the COO of the company that I worked for at the time, Stevenson Newspapers, um, which owned the Western Nebraska Observer, which is the newspaper that I was at in Kimball, he strongly encouraged me not to put it on the front page. Not because it wasn't, notable that a businessman in town had, killed themselves or killed himself, but because he knew people wouldn't react to it well, and they shouldn't have. But I did anyway because I thought to myself, whatever, he doesn't know. Like, it was seriously, it was just like stubbornness, like, yeah, whatever. And then, because I didn't listen, I got my first parade of angry phone calls and, all these mean things and letters and, you know, the stuff I would become used to later on in my career, but it was the first time that I kind of heavily experienced it. So I was really discouraged. And at that point in time, the person that I would hang out with or talk to, oddly enough, when I felt discouraged or when I felt out of place or I just needed kind of an older person to kind of talk to and get perspective from. And that person was actually the Kimball County Sheriff, Harry Gilway. Um, Gilway was a middle aged man who was very nice, very polite. I knew he was a devout Christian. We had some experiences with each other with ride alongs and stuff like that. And me and Gilway, what would happen is that after he trusted me and knew that when he told me stuff off the record, it was actually off the record. We started talking off the record all the time in his office about things that had happened in town, and he kind of slowly filled me in on the kind of politics and different behind the scenes social landmines that I needed to avoid. Now, on this particular time that I went to go see Gilway, we addressed the suicide, and we actually addressed two of them. Um, Now, I guess I should mention right now that I'm going to get into details about graphic suicides that happen in Kimball. I'm not going to mention these people's names or the time frame, um, but the details are disturbing. And I talk about them now very unflinching because, to be quite honest, these are the kinds of things that I've been hearing for 8 years or that have been going into my mind for 8 years that the public never has to deal with unless they look for it, I guess. But that's kind of my disclaimer, like bailout now if you can't handle that kind of stuff. But um, me and Gilway talked about the suicide that happened, and he he got detailed because I asked him what it was, and he told me that what had happened is that he had this person had gone out into a field with a rifle, and what they had done is shot up through their head. Um, and what happened? The disturbing detail is that apparently, when you do that at such an angle, um, your face kind of opens up like cabinet doors. Um, and that's exactly how Gilway put it. And, we would talk about things like that. And uh, fortunately, professionally, conversations like that with him desensitized me to those kinds of details. Unfortunately, as a person, it desensitized me to those sorts of details. Because I think those should horrify you, but they don't horrify me anymore. That's kind of the con of being a journalist. Um, but then, you know, he uh, he and I talked about the backlash, and he immediately told me like, "Yeah, you should not have done that." And I knew. Really, I think I wanted somebody to tell me I shouldn't have done it, but also be encouraging at the same time. And he did that. Kind of chided me, but also, said it was, it's understandable. I was a kid and I was from a bigger city where it wouldn't have been maybe such a big deal and that kind of thing. So I felt better. Um, but then he told me about a situation that had happened with one of his deputies um, that uh, was, as he said, pretty much the most difficult thing that one of the most difficult things he had to watch somebody deal with or kind of go through. And this is the story that I've never forgotten in all these years, no matter how many details or stories are in it. And it still horrifies me, actually. This one still does each time because it was the first. Um, but what had happened is that this deputy had been getting phone calls from a troubled youth, I think. Um, and the deputy had he would get calls and he would talk to him, and sometimes he would go over to the youth's house and he would try to help him, because the kid was having mental health issues and things like that. And Kimball, being a small city, I mean, especially in the middle of no man's land. I mean, there was a hospital in the city that did what it could, but the nearest, like next level hospital, I think, was either in Cheyenne or Scottsbluff. Cheyenne was an hour away. Scottsbluff was about 40 miles away to the north. So I say that because there weren't a lot of services that were available. There weren't the same resources that you'd think about in Kenosha as far as mental health services, as far as those types of things. So this deputy would genuinely try to help this kid. Um, and then one day, um, the kid called and the deputy wasn't there. And so the deputy got back shortly afterwards and he saw the message and he raced over to the kid's house. And the way Gilway tells it is that the deputy, the deputy um, pulled into the driveway, and the kid was facing away from him. And I guess at the time that the deputy was pulling in, um, the kid had a gun that was also like the other person, I think under his chin. And well, at some point between the deputy pulling up and um, getting out of his car, or out of his truck, the kid had pulled the trigger, but he was still standing. So as the deputy's walking towards him to try to figure out, you know, what condition he's in, if he's okay, not knowing that he's, shot himself, um, the kid turns around, and the description is that what was left of his face was only able to make a gurgling noise. Um, so the deputy kind of panicked and, ran back to his truck to kind of call help. Um, and as he's doing that, the kid's kind of running around his car and pounding on the windows, making that noise. Um, and then backup arrives, and, Gilway arrives on scene, I believe. Um, and, Gilway is actually just surprised the kid's not dead at this point. And they're trying to treat him on the scene. They've also called in a helicopter to take the kid flight for life and, to Cheyenne or Scotts Bluff. And as the kid's kind of lying there and still, um, all he can do is make that noise. Um, and the helicopter's, kind of overhead, ready to take him. He dies. Um, and that's kind of what everybody saw that, would have been on the scene or watching. But Gilway told me an extra detail about himself. You see, when Gilway was there and he was leaning over the kid, um, as he was kind of dying, the kid's mother, for some reason, looked over and saw Gilway, and she got it in her head that Gilway had said the Lord's Prayer with the kid, which, again, Gilway was a devout person, so it wasn't unusual for that to have been um, something he would do. And his what he told me is that he let her think that, because it was much better than the actual, thing he was doing. He was actually sitting there and staring at this youth who was in so much pain and couldn't even speak anymore, but was very much aware of everything going on. Um, and he was praying that the kid would die, that the kid's nightmare would finally be over. Now, when I had walked into Gilway's office on that day, he had been staring out the window. And the way his office was set up is that, so he had his desk and his chair behind it, and there were two windows and a bookshelf between the windows, and there was always a rifle that was up against the bookshelf. And Gilway was sitting there when I walked in. He was just staring out the window. And kind of in that way where somebody's thinking about something specific. It's not a daydream, it's not a haze, it's just very much fixated on something. And, when I caught his attention or like, waved my hand and he came out of it, he gave me something like, oh, I was just thinking about how stupid the mayor is. Because the county and city there did not get along. In fact, one of my first major stories was the police chief at the time, I want to say his name was Mark Simpson, but I'd have to look it up. He was had a falling out with Gilway because he had fabricated a drug house, fabricated evidence that there were drugs being sold out of a house, fabricated everything, and and because of all that, they actually raided a house that they had no business to raid. Um, and he admitted it to Gilway after being grilled afterwards, and Gilway lost it and told the chief never to step foot in his office ever again. And then people did some digging and found out that the chief of police had actually lied about his credentials as a police officer, and he wasn't qualified to be a police chief in any way, shape, or form. He resigned before anything could be done about it. So, and the mayor of Kimball fully supported the police chief and, his choice to appoint him and everything like that, even in the face of, this guy legitimately lied about all of his credentials, which makes a lot of sense with some of the things that he was proposing doing. Um, so I say that to kind of point out that it was a good lie by Gilway. It would make a lot of sense for him to just sit there and think about how dumb he thought the mayor is. Because honestly, around that time period, there were a lot of reasons for people to think that, I think, in that city. But it wasn't until after our conversation that I realized that there is no way Gilway was ever thinking about the mayor that day. He was thinking about that story. And I wonder how often he does. Probably more often than I do, and I think about it a lot. It's one of those things that I forgot to remember to forget. Well, that's been the first story in what will be a weekly series of stories from my career. Not all of them will be dark. Not all of them will be light. Some of them will be funny. Some of them will be about tragedies I've seen. Some of them will be about hopeful and positive things that I've seen because I've seen a lot of those too. I've seen it all. And I hope that you keep tuning in and letting me tell you about it. Thank you for your time, for your support. If you'd like to support my writing, you can do so by visiting facebook.com/the Uptown Observer. That is my baby. And currently the sponsor of Observances with Daniel Thompson, the Uptown Observer, independent journalism for the people, funded by the people. That's right. My baby is completely funded by my supporters. And I don't know that I'd have it any other way. Till next time, take care of yourselves and stay safe out there.